Emma's here. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start. Just had a note that most people who are meant to be here are here, and others, Emma will continue to bring them. So I just want to say to everyone, welcome to what I think is my favourite event of this year, to host and hopefully have a fantastic conversation with our brilliant, brilliant panellists. I want to do a couple of bits of housekeeping before we start. First of all, we have the wonderful Claire who is doing live captioning with us today. Please go over to Stream Text to access it. If there are any issues, please contact Emma at LEEDS2023 through the chat on the left-hand side. Also, how best to find the panel? You have to come into the theatre when you come into the space. I think Emma from LEEDS2023 is bringing people in, and if you come in and take a seat in the auditorium, you'll be able to hear us, but we won't be able to hear you. So as one would have in a normal auditorium, we won't hear the audience whispering and chatting away, but you won't even be able to talk to each other once you're sat in the seats. You're welcome to navigate the world once we've had the session. In order to access the session, you have to be in the theatre. If you're accessing the wonderful world that Closed Forum have created and playing outside, you won't really be able to hear us. So I'm kind of encouraging people to kind of come into the space and letting people that are coming to the space. There is the panelists. Brilliant, thank you. I was just going to say, for the panelists, can you please mute yourself when you are not speaking? Because noise will translate into the space and we'll be able to hear you. So that was a great example of please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to take questions at the end of the conversation with all of the panelists. Please put them in the chat directly to me, and then I'll be able to see them and access them. Same for the panelists. It'd be great, if you've got any questions for each other during the course of the session, please also put them into the chat. Quick introduction about LEEDS2023, who are part host of this event. LEEDS2023 is a year of culture and art that is taking place in 2023, as it says in the title. As everyone knows, it was originally bidding to be capital of culture as part of the European capital of culture, but as we all know, events from last year and as a result of Brexit, Leeds have been very brave, I think, and very committed, and have basically gone ahead to create a year of arts and culture for the city and the region. So yeah, brilliant, absolutely fantastic. What I'm also going to do, kind of give you a little bit of background about Leeds Digital Festival. This is a series of small curated events that are taking place over this time of the year. Later in the year, Leeds Digital Festival will be creating the festival online, and hopefully, one would hope, in the real world as well, as we see the world, the country beginning to kind of unlock and come out of lockdown. Please go onto their website to see what other events there are, and there will be many more events after this one as part of the short curated program that they're doing at this time in the year. This is also co-hosted with Leeds Global Forum. So I think that's all of my housekeeping. But mainly, if you want to wander around the auditorium, please do, but you will hear us if you're in the auditorium. If you just want to have a seat and just kind of listen to us, that's equally great. Quick introduction. My name is Shanaz Gulzar. I'm an artist, producer, and I work across art form. I am really excited to welcome our panelists today. We've got a fantastic group of people. Akila Bertram, artist extraordinaire, calls herself a cross art form creator. I'll be digging into that a bit more in a minute. Also, the fantastic Threshold, who are working across the sector to kind of really look at and have existed for the last 18 to 20 years. So really have worked and seen the development that has taken place in the digital space and the offer that digital gives both artists, creatives, and other industries to collaboratively collaboratively work together. Then I'm going to talk to the fantastic Matt and Adam from Closed Forum, who've created this world that you're all in, and also, you know, how we're playing with it and how we're existing in it. So to talk about their work, their aesthetics, and how they approach what they do, and some of their considerations. And then to the wonderful Sarah Ellis from the RSC, and to talk about Dream. I don't know how many of you know about Dream, but it's this R&D work exploring the kind of how theatre in a live space, almost within a game, almost within a 3D space, can create a different experience for audiences and a different opportunity for artists. I did see Dream earlier this year, so I was blown away by it, both the opportunities, but also how younger audiences access Shakespeare. So we'll come to some of that, but I'm going to start with Akila.
Sorry?
I can hear you now. Sorry, there was a bit of a delay.
All right, cool. Yeah, as Shanaz mentioned, I'm Akila. I'm a visual artist based in Leeds. I work across a range of different disciplines and typically collaborate with a range of different makers, creators from different fields. I mainly make installations. They started off just being about light and sound and how they're experienced, and they've evolved over the last few years into interactive spaces that people can come into and have a little bit more autonomy and dialogue with in the various different ways. At the moment, I'm developing international artwork that will seek to connect people in the African diaspora through physical installations that create a virtual sense of presence, and whatever that means in between. It's currently in the R&D phase. And I'm also a fellow at the University of Leeds in the Fine Art Department.
I just wanted to dig a little bit more about, you know, what you just mentioned about access to, you know, and kind of wanting to work, you know, cross internationally and with the African diaspora. There's one of your projects that I've been following and looking at, Return. I think it kind of explores what you would just kind of mentioned. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about Return.
And Return started off. My background is I'm African Caribbean. My parents are from Jamaica, and the first time I visited the country that I'd heard so much about was in 2018 when I was 28, and it was a moment where something that had been a very real and tangible part of my life through stories, through accounts from other people, through secondhand tellings, suddenly became this very surreal, real experience. And then the following year, I visited Ghana, which is also part of my ancestry and heritage story. And it got me thinking about, if you are not able to connect with a physical place that has sentimental or cultural value to you, what are your other options if you can't physically travel there, as I hadn't been able to prior to those two visits. And that kind of evolved into many different avenues, but ultimately I'm developing an installation that will allow people in different locations in the African diaspora to create a shared sense of physical space and physical interaction through different haptic outputs, such as footsteps becoming vibrations, hand movements becoming gestures in light and sound, and all sorts of responses. And I'll be looking at drawing on different cultural practices from across the African diaspora to create the aesthetic and the feeling of those outputs. And seeing, really, it's a big experiment, seeing if there is a way to, if you can't physically visit people or places that have sentimental or significant value to you, what other avenues do you have to explore? And there'll be a digital element to that as well. So virtually online, what kind of spaces, like the creation of Gathertown, like what can we create as worlds to represent spaces for connection in different parts of our life?
It's almost like the way you approach that work and thinking about how can you access a physical space digitally if you cannot be there was almost preemptive. And in the last 13 months.
Yes, definitely. Like, I think when I started to make it, it was very much like, is this just Skype on crack? Is it just a redo of something that we've already had? And then I wouldn't say miraculously, but serendipitously, with all the negative sides of the pandemic, it did become very pertinent. It did become something that was on the forefront of everybody's minds because it's what we were all experiencing, this lack of access to physical space, this restriction of movement around the world, around our cities, to our families, to people that were important to us. So it really has undergone a very intensive R&D process, in the sense that suddenly it's become a very crucial question, just coincidentally.
It's almost like touch and experience, but without touching and experiencing. It's like, you know, the very thing that makes us human, the thing that about touching each other and making connection, we can't do that currently. And it feels piece that you're creating, especially exploring, you know, how haptics can enable us to inhabit each other's experience and feel vibrations and feel, you know, emotional touch. It's almost like what you're doing is try to simulate that in quite, it feels quite intimate, but without the touch.
Yeah, and I think it mirrors a lot of things that we already experience. If you think about your favorite piece of music, if you think about your favorite film, and you've inhabited a very intimate moment within those pieces of creations that, you know, thousands and millions of other people who are anonymous to you have also inhabited. And I suppose it's thinking about how you can curate a hybrid of all those different intimate moments into one overall environment, one overall experience. And we do it a million of different ways already in different social media platforms and different gaming platforms. You know, but we're actually very familiar with it in a million different ways. And so I'm just trying to make something that would have resonance with a particular group of people for a particular reason, and just another platform, really.
Well, it's also, I think because of what's happened in the last 13 months, it feels very much that the thing that we've all missed, the thing that we are all missing, can be recreated in a way that we feel safe and able to interact and take part. The thing that I'm always interested in massively is the artist's vision and the audience experience, because what an artist or a creative envisages for an audience, and then how the audience actually interact with it, that can massively shift from, you know, the original idea. You know, how are you during your R&D phase, are you kind of trying to capture any of that experience from the audience, and how are you thinking about using that as you develop the project?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because it's something that's very integral to how the work is developed. So planned into the R&D are community consultations that will take place in forms of feedback sessions. So as we prototype different things and we get people to experience them and have conversations about what that experience was, some of it's about the concepts of the project. So we're speaking to different makers, creators, researchers, and just really asking questions about, if we were to manifest these quite theoretical things and conceptual things, what would it look like? What would you need from it? So it's very much not developed in a vacuum. It's developed in tandem with it being exhibited and shown and reworked and retested, because the point is that it would be something people want to use. So I can't make it on my own, really. So yeah, we need the input. Otherwise, there is no project.
It's interesting. There's a quite a few artists of the, and I don't know whether it's same, you know, for the African Caribbean diaspora, but from the South Asian diaspora. When I was growing up, one of the ways, because a lot of my family are illiterate, one of the ways that we communicated with each other was through cassette tapes. So you have family abroad who would record, you know, their greetings, what they had to say to you, what they wanted to say, because it was easier for them, and they could press the record button on a cassette tape recorder, and because they were illiterate, they couldn't write. So a lot of work being done. I think there's quite a few artists who are actually trying to capture some of that archive, because basically they deteriorate. And I also remember we used to tape over old Bollywood song tapes and things. It feels like what you're developing is, and what you're creating is a version of that, but like, you know, 5.0, 10.0, you know, into the future. I could talk to you for ages, Akila, but I also want to kind of explore, you know, with the rest of my panelists as well. But, you know, thank you so much for that. And
thank you.
If anybody's got any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll very much come back and have a chat with Akila and kind of try and kind of get more information from her. I'm really interested to see what the next steps are with this project as well. But I'm going to take us over to Sam.
couldn't find my unmute button. Hello. You're right. Yeah, I'm Sam. I'm Director of Programs for Threshold Studios, and I'm one of the co-directors of Frequency Festival of Digital Culture. Like you say, we've been going 20 plus years, specialising in digital moving image and public realm work for social change and inclusivity. And the festival we've been running, it's our 10th year this year for Frequency, which is a festival of digital creativity biannually in Lincoln.
Amazing. Congratulations. 20 years. You've seen quite a development happen then technically and digitally, not just through how audiences are accessing and kind of utilizing and playing with what what you're sharing at festivals, but how artists play. So it would be good to kind of have like I don't know how long you've been with Threshold, but it'd be good to kind of for you to go, okay, these are the most significant things that you've seen shift and change.
Well, I've been with Threshold for 17 years, so I've been there for kind of quite a lot of it. I think it's really interesting because when we first started, we did a lot of engagement work, and that was about kind of reinvesting skills back into society to address gaps to opportunities. There's always been themes to our work that's continued, but you're right in the way that kind of the technology advances. Because when we first started working with artists moving image, that was like sort of 1998, 2000, there was a real gap between where Arts Council weren't kind of embracing it, and Film Council weren't really kind of embracing it. So there was these artists working with new forms of media that were sort of falling into this gap in the middle. But some of the experimentation at that point was amazing because it was that crossover between analog and digital. I remember people making kind of their own resin lenses and kind of, really early on kind of Steadicam rigs that could kind of work in these amazing ways. So that kind of creativity and that innovation, irrespective of where we were in the kind of levels of tech. And then when we started doing Frequency, because we're every 2 years, it is really, really interesting the way you see it. You get to revisit it almost every 2 years. So in 2011, when people were starting to push things a little bit more, sometimes there was a thing of where it was a bit more process driven than experience driven. So, there was a lot that went into the work, but maybe it didn't quite translate in the same way. Then in 2013, like projections, I swear in 2013, I just hired every projector up and down the country. And that was kind of like mapping interactivity. And then from 2015 onwards, it felt like there was a real shift because what you were actually starting to see were people kind of accessing and creating their own technology. So you were starting to see kind of more built interactive work, more kind of like hacked environment work, and then the growth of kind of VR and AR as well. So yeah, there's a cycle, and actually over the last year with everyone going indoors, it's been really interesting to see kind of where that acceleration is happening, like more quickly and more quickly. And it feels like we're really hitting a point where it's accessible to the creator. When you bring that kind of creative technologist artist relationship together, there's a really interesting moment of how digital can augment that art form and how it can expand it out for audience experience and kind of become kind of quite magical in a lot of sense when it's kind of platform and concept.
I love that moment where you start playing or looking at a new way of making art, and because you don't know what the rules are, you just go into it. And I think that's what artists tend to do a lot. It's like, and especially, I think you're absolutely right at the beginning. It was like, we have this space, these tools are all quite new to us. There's no rules to follow. Nobody's saying this is how you should do it or that is how you should do it. So everything's up for grabs.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what's really interesting with public audiences as well, because we use non-traditional spaces and work in those spaces where everyone has agency. Digital I don't sort of see as an art form. It's more of an augmentation, but what it allows you to do in terms of audience development is it starts an intersectionality of kind of play where everyone can kind of start. I don't know why I'm using this hand gesture. It creates this intersection where everyone's on an equal playing field, but then they can start to build their journey out from it and kind of bring their own meaning to it. But digital has this huge sense of play and experimentation that isn't exclusive to people.
I think over the title of this session is beyond the live stream, because when it seems like when larger organizations talk about digital, it becomes about content that's already been created, or it's a live stream, or it's a live performance that is then live streamed. It's been really interesting to see over this last year how theatres, like, and I'm going to obviously talk to Sarah about this a little bit later as well, but how theatre and theatre makers have embraced it. And, you know, have you seen, do you think there has been, you know, a more of an approach of play and kind of taking, you know, theatre and making it for a digital space? Have you seen any of that you think, you know, for you is really quite exciting?
Yeah, I think even at the front end, it was kind of really interesting. You really hit upon it. Like, we all had a different definition of what digital meant for us. And I think, you know, some of the kind of smaller, more agile organizations, we utilized it in a very different way, where institutions had a much different relationship to it. And it's whether or not it was kind of like a back end organizational tool or a front end presentation tool. And I think we kind of saw when we had that first shift to digital content that it was very intense. It was very, very intense, because there wasn't like that consideration of how you adapt to an audience or you adapt to a needs. And actually, when you look at something like Gathertown, it does kind of, it shows the development of that. It shows kind of where the audience need is, and actually kind of where you could start to change that experience a little bit. I think theatre-wise, there's been some really interesting things coming from especially from a lot of the smaller companies who are kind of taking a bit more chances with a piece of work that they have, or kind of thinking on a DIY skill set is a really, really valuable thing. I think, especially at the point where we're at a kind of like a rapid acceleration or rapid innovation, because it's much more about a play framework than a right or wrong framework. So yeah, there's been some really great things that I've seen coming out. There's a piece, Gramophones Theatre did a piece that is an audio piece where you actually get sent a physical kit. There's almost like a little ritual bit that you have to do first, but from an intergenerational perspective, it's the younger audience member taking the lead. But essentially what they did is they created a theatre experience for bubbles, which you could take to any space that you wanted. And I just think that was so kind of beyond the realm of thinking in a limited space. It really kind of took the opportunities that we had and think about how we can blend now that digital and physical experience, because people do want that connection, but we don't know so much about where people are. We have to kind of stay really true to that spirit of experimentation in this year, kind of putting safety first.
Yeah.
But actually thinking about how can we take that kind of feeling of connection and just like edge it a little bit closer, or kind of create the moment where people can engage to where they feel comfortable as opposed to being dictated to. So it's really interesting to think about how to come at that.
You've also touched on something there where you said, you know, enable people to access it the way they can actually play with it and interact with it rather than being dictated to. You know, I think in the early days, it was like, oh, you know, this is a democratizing space, it's a level space, it's an equitable space. We know there's a real gap between those who have access to technology and those who have access to tech within this country, well, you know, what one would consider, you know, a developed country, and those who don't. But the last year, I was listening to radio this morning, and they were saying that the last year that gap has shrunk. And maybe I'm cynical. I think I am cynical. It's not a case of maybe. And I just think, you know, that gap has not shrunk for everybody. You know,
I think it's really interesting, because I think what I started hearing more and more is it wasn't so much about the kind of like the tech, or it was about the data, or and even really in terms of like audience development and inclusivity, there's another challenge, because a lot of times to kind of create the confidence with these new audiences, you have to go to the spaces where they are, where they inhabit, and as opposed to asking them to come to a thing and behave in a certain way, you take away those barriers and kind of involve them in it. It's a bit more of a bystander approach. And I think we have so many potential divides coming, because, you know, we're such an on-demand generation and such an on-demand, and I remember them talking about on-demand and how one day you kind of curate everything you watch and you're like, oh yeah, but it's really happened. And now we've got a year where, you know, you have your channels, you have your influencers, you create your own echo chamber, and there are people who exist outside that, and we still need to think about how we connect with them, how we make sure that their voice and their experience is represented in the cultures and the experiences that we're putting out there.
I think very much so. I think one of the things that I've massively seen grow over this, last year, you're absolutely right, it's the cross-generational, the fact that young, children, grandchildren, if they're in a bubble with their parents, end up or grandparents, they end up sharing some of what they're interested in, or what what they think, you need to see this, you need to be a part of this. And similar question to what I asked Akila is the intention of the artist and what the artist wants to do, and then what the audience do to it. Once it's there, it totally shifts. A project. It'd be good to hear from you in response to that question, what you've seen happening as well.
I think there's another part in that relationship as well, of kind of like a producer, kind of artist, producer, and audience, because I think when we put the festival on, and when we work in these spaces that kind of underground sites or bus stations or something like that, you almost have to think about that user experience. Weirdly, like one of the best examples of it is kind of like theme parks. Like they really think about that, like kind of audience throughput. They think about the audience experience and how you migrate and how you transit them. And I think when you start to develop out that relationship and you're bringing together like artist, producer, technologist, but even kind of like place-based partners as well, like what can sort of local authorities or business improvements tell you about kind of areas of low footfall in the city? How can you use that information about where these communities who are at risk of separating kind of are, and how can you think about moments of program that kind of touches them in some way and builds that confidence, and bring the artist into that conversation as well, because it's their kind of innovation and their vision that you're sort of creating that that through route for people.
Yeah, I think you've also touched on the kind of working, with councils, working with different kind of partners, stakeholders, and I talked about the artist and the audience relationship, but you're absolutely right. There's lots of other links and connections between artist and audience relationship, which also those stakeholders will also shift and change from the original vision to the final iteration.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'd love to talk to you as well. I might just ask you to all hang out in Gathertown afterwards. But what I would love to do is talk to Matt and Adam and bring them in on the conversation, and kind of, because this also, I'm an 80s kid, so I'm looking at this aesthetic of Gathertown and I absolutely love it. So I'm just going to ask Matt and Adam to join the conversation. Give us, first of all, I'm going to ask you just to give us a quick introduction about yourselves, but then really tell us, first of all, I really would love to know your thinking for how you created this space, and the fact that we are in a theatre, with everybody in their seats, literally simulating the real world, which then encourages behaviour that mirrors the real world. Because earlier, one of the panelists was like, I'm just going to go get a cup of tea. I actually expected her to get off the stage and walk to get a cup of tea. And so there's a wonderful synergy with what we tend to do, and then in the real world, and then what we find ourselves doing when we're in Gathertown. So it'd be great if you could just introduce yourselves first.
Sure. So hi, I'm Matt.
Matt, you're muted.
I'm muted.
Oh no, you're not.
No, he's got. Oh, he's not. Oh.
I'm not muted.
Oh, sorry. I apologise. I couldn't hear you for a second.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just stand closer to my microphone. Sorry. So me and Adam are a collective of artists called Closed Forum. We've been working together since late 2016, and the core team is just me and Adam, and then it sort of grows on a project by project basis. We make mostly digital events and performances, and we are really keen to work with interactive open source projects that often touch on anxiety, depression, mental health, and then like dreams and reality. Adam, do you want to say anything? We started working together in 2016. We kind of started off from more of a live stream point of view, where we were creating work, so digital work on live stream, where our first project was we did a live stream walk from Leeds all the way to Rotherham, from the LGI to the
Yorkshire Heart of Steel, which is in the centre of Rotherham, and the idea was it was to do with a operation I had on my heart many years ago, and friends donated some money to the British Heart Foundation, who were funding the heart. But as we live streamed this walk, we got people to interact and talk to us and challenge us to do things, and so we was trying to create that sort of feeling of live performance where people were actively influencing our walk and where we went, which turns we were taking, how we were doing stuff, what we talked about, as well as then us doing the physical challenge and going to the place. And then, but then along the way as well, I took all my sort of vital heart statistics and compared them to my statistics I had on my operation. So we kind of started off playing with like live stream stuff with there, and then from working with live stream and sort of going that, we started to go towards more digital and sort of more or sort of making more digital platforms like Gather Town and some of the video games, and taking a sort of building our own platforms rather than utilizing other platforms from then on, really.
Yeah, so we started working on an open source piece of software called Twine, which is used for open source storytelling, which we used for a couple of years. Trying to make like city-wide games where people would use their mobile phone to explore real-life spaces with interactive storytelling on their phone. And then I guess that really came to a quick halt last year, because our main aim for those projects were getting people out into real physical spaces, and like the crossover of using like gaming mechanics in real spaces. So we've been working, I guess the work where we were already leading has been quite like fortunate for us as a company, where we were already moving away from that and looking at other open source things that utilize gaming. And I guess the main thing to say is like the reason we love video game mechanics is because it really allows audiences to push the barriers. So, like, when you play a video game, you might cheat, you might try to break it, you might push the barriers of it and try to, like, glitch out of a wall. You wouldn't really walk on a stage in a theatre and see if you can, like, push over the set. But you definitely would do that in a video game, and we really like that dynamic of, like, audience agency. So, over the last few years, we've seen, like, the removal of the barriers between audiences and video games in loads of different ways, like with the growth of Twitch, where people stream games. It's sort of like reintroduced that like classic audience and performer relationship in gaming, but alongside that you've also got the platforms, and the games are open so people can interact with them in their own ways and test them out, and that's essentially what we're trying to do with everything we make. We want things where people can just experience it and it's really accessible, and just maybe like watch a video of it, or can go in and play around with it and try to break it.
Interestingly, you talked about agency just now, and the fact that games give agency, and you also mentioned Twitch. When I first went into Twitch, I think it was about a couple of years ago, I disappeared into it, did not emerge out of that world for a couple of hours. It's actually addictive. Mm-hmm. And then when I came out of it, all I wanted to do was write about the experience that I had just had. It is like feels almost like an alternate reality that exists purely online, and people actually live their lives online. You talked about agency, and you talked about audience agency, and you're absolutely right. Nobody would walk onto a stage and push a set over, but you are encouraged to do that in games. You're encouraged to do things in games that you wouldn't in real life. How do you find that when you kind of start creating your work? And it would be good to hear about it in the context of setting up Gather Town, because we are literally simulating real life right now by being on a stage and the audience in the auditorium.
I think for us, especially when we start a project, I guess you try to make sure it's not breakable at first, and you want to try and make sure that there's no way of people breaking stuff. And then once you sort of built the core mechanics of trying to not have people break them, you then on purposely add in things that you want people to break, and people will still say with here, when we first started making Gather Town, we found that people could slip through certain walls, and then they'd go off to the side of the map and walk around and disappear onto the infinite and pop up in different places. And you would see them on another side of the fence, and then other people that come up to the fence go, how on earth do you get there? And then they'll purposely start trying to find that way around. So we kind of, especially with Gather Town, we try to make it so that they on purposely make it so that you can't do that. And then and once you've done that, you want to try, make it sort of a planned breakage as much as possible, because there's nothing worse than seeing your work on purposely broken, or nothing worse than seeing your work broken where you don't want it to be. But it's also can be quite exciting because it can inspire you. Because another project we're working on at the minute, Anxiety Arcade, which is going to be a live arcade cabinet, which is going to be at Trinity Centre in a month's time. We've had a lot of sort of demos of that, and a lot of people experimenting with that. And as people break it, we've been inspired to add those mechanics into our game. Yeah. So if someone would find, say, a little secret passage, which we thought we'd deleted from it, but actually because they found that, they then were able to go to a different room, and then we've added that mechanic into the game. And Matt, do you want to carry on there?
Sure. So yeah, we're really interested in getting in audiences to test things out, and I think in a way that's also what today and tomorrow is. So for us, this is a really big stress test of this world we've created, so that we want feedback on how people explored it, how they found it, what's useful, what's interesting, and if they found any way to break things or what doesn't work quite well for them. They're things that we're really interested in, I think, because then we can see where we can push the boundaries.
That almost makes me think that every project that one does, especially that is interactive or gaming based or requires audience participation, is always going to be in R&D, because you're always going to be improving on it. Mm-hmm. You're always going to or develop it, or not necessarily improving on it, but responding to some of that feedback from audiences to kind of make it so that it can develop in surprising ways as well. When you have the idea and you think, actually, I don't think anybody's going to be interested in that. That's the very thing people are interested in.
Yeah, we come from a background of making small, intimate solo performances and small little collaborative works, and I think that really carries over into when we've started working more in digital space, because you always have that immediate audience reaction and feedback, and we try to make things that can be a personal experience for each audience member, and that's really easy to do. When we were doing live performances that integrated different digital technologies. But then when we're doing something a little bit grander scale, like the game we're making that's going to live inside an arcade machine, we almost have to test and anticipate all the different ways that people might interact with it, and then get audiences to test it out and play with it in different ways, and then build that out, rather than, because you can't really improvise or switch things up when it has to be developed on a platform that's rigorously tested and has hundreds of hours of testing built into it.
On Anxiety Arcade, it'd be good to kind of get an understanding of the trajectory of it, because it seems so pertinent to where people find themselves currently and how people are feeling as a result of what we're all experiencing across the world in different ways. That's all. That's also what I found really interesting over the last 13 months, just to see how each region, each country, even within a country, how you experience it differently. But it feels so pertinent. So when was that idea originated?
It was actually pre-lockdown. I was making work and collaborating with Adam, making work about my own anxiety, and slowly over the last few years, I've been slowly removing myself as a performer from my own work, so that it's not just as autobiographical, but also to protect my own mental health a little bit. So then we applied to be part of a festival called Compass Festival in 2019, and the festival was supposed to be in 2020, but obviously has been delayed. And we were building using the technology that we knew. We were building a small interactive fiction, and then we started utilizing new open source technologies that we hadn't played with before, and using Unity and moving more into a gaming space. And we wanted to make something that is a short, repeatable, semi-autobiographical experience. But it's essentially like you play a character and your mission is just to get outside your flat. And you've got like 24 minutes, which is like 24-hour clock, and you've got to get outside, and each room has tiny little mini games, and they each show like different anxieties that can like sort of be barriers in your way to just getting outside, like just checking your emails, brushing your teeth, checking your answer phone, watching the news, things like that are all like little mini games in it. And we're not like trying to do it in a way of being experts on mental health, but we're trying to like open more dialogues about it and get people talking about it a little more in like a creative way.
It's interesting, all those behaviours that you've just described, everything that you've just said, very much, I think a lot of people will resonate who might, have gone, don't want to check my phone this morning, have no idea what's coming at me. I know I've got a colleague who goes, I can't check my emails beyond a certain time in the evening because then I won't sleep. When I wake up in the morning, I have to check it first thing in the morning while I'm still in bed. To me, that's counterintuitive. You're still in bed. If you can't check it in the evening, then it'll be interesting to see that person play that out on the arcade. I could talk to you guys for ages, but I'm aware that I'd love to bring Sarah into this conversation, especially because we are, we've kind of started to touch upon massively about performance, streaming, interactivity, R&D, and how audience feedback can actually shift something. So Sarah, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to listen to everyone talk about their work and share their work in this space. And it's a space I've never been in before, so it's great.
It'd be, for those people who don't know, it'd be great just to hear about Dream, but also what the thinking behind the Royal Shakespeare Company's, the RSC's approach to developing something like Dream. It was phenomenal when I witnessed it, when I played with it, and I was sitting there with my daughter, and we were both trying to kind of be interactive, be in the space. I don't want, and actually seeing, and I think I did the rehearsal version. And I saw when we went to the actors, when we came out of the world and went into the actors, that moment of realization, it was live.
Yeah, we really wanted everyone to know it was live. And it's really hard when you make a piece of work that's digital and has characters like you're seeing on this panel, to get that sense of liveness and togetherness. And so, yeah, Dream was a culmination of about 2-3 years worth of research and development, looking at the future of live performance using immersive technologies. And we were due to have a performance in Stratford-upon-Avon in person, in real life. Can you imagine? Just as the pandemic hit and we had to stop production. And it was probably one of the hardest things professionally that I've had to deal with, to pay for freelancers, make sure that they were all right. It was the first thing, stop production quickly, so that we had to make a painful decision very, very quickly up front before we knew what was going on in the pandemic, to take a pause. And the first thing we did was commission a piece of audience research around what audiences were craving at this time, what they needed. And for us to, because with the funder as well, it was really important to deliver something. And how did we keep a consortium of 14 partners together that was a mixture of arts organisations, researchers, technology companies? So we commissioned this research, and in that research, it overwhelmingly came back that audiences were craving togetherness and liveness. But what it also highlighted, really importantly, that there was a huge digital inequity in people's homes. And usually when you make experiences, you can provide the technology for audiences to experience that piece with, but that we don't have that luxury in people's everyday lives. And I think, if anything, what this pandemic has taught us is what the privileged position we are when we talk about immersive tech, or we talk about any technology, actually. And a big question on my mind is, how do we work towards an inclusive recovery when we're working in digital as well? So we needed to create a performance that was completely virtual, that wasn't going to have an in-person element in real life in terms of audiences, and connect with people in their homes, and all of those things we'd never done before. And who would we need to develop that? What did we need to do? Was a really, really important process that we held over a period of months, respectfully. How did we keep the consortium together? So Dream, what we were always going to look at the play in Midsummer Night's Dream. It's a wonderful play to imagine and explore. But taking that forward, all we had were the assets of a recording the Philharmonia did the day before lockdown, which was all the music material that we wanted to use. So that's all we had. And from there, we built back up a performance that used motion capture technology, having actors in a live space performing in real time. And they were driving these magical, mystical characters that were performed to you, streamed live, all very COVID safe, very, very stressful conditions in terms of making that safe. And in that, we performed not the play, but a version and a reimagining of that play using the spirit world. And we created a 7-kilometer forest in a game engine, but using a 7x7 meter performance space. So we used a games engine to bring it all together. We used live performance and a wonderful movement director called Sarah Perry to bring the performance together. We worked with our head of literary, Pippa Hill, to reimagine what a text would be in a completely immersed space. And for a week, we performed this experimental piece of research and development to audiences around the world. And we reached 65,000 audience members showed up, 92 countries we reached, and we got 76% new bookers to the Royal Shakespeare Company. So these were people we'd never met before. And one of the important things was to look at ritual and how you redefine all those rituals that you do in person and how you reappropriate them. So all of it was a huge piece of experimentation. But we saw that social media wise, the thing that got shared the most was this lobby that we created before you came in, and everyone could see the number of people in the audience. It was going up, and you saw this, oh my God, I'm part of 2,000 people watching this experience together. And sometimes we get really over excited about the hard technology or this cutting edge technology, but all people effectively did was show up.
Yeah.
And we were thinking a lot about the interactivity with the relationship between the audience and the performer. But actually, I'm now from this super interested in the interconnections between audiences and audiences. Because what I realized is actually that anticipation is the friction between audience members when they come in as an individual and then blend into a collective is a friction and a connectivity which is so important. So those were our learnings, and it was a genuine collaboration between the Royal Shakespeare Company, Marshmallow Laser Feast, Philharmonia Orchestra, and Manchester International Festival. And I think only good things can come through collaboration.
I remember when I was watching the rehearsal, I was on a WhatsApp group at the same time with a group of friends who were also on it. And, you know, those of us who could access the interactivity, it almost became those who could and those who couldn't. So if you could access and get to the interactivity, you were in. And if you couldn't, the amount of pouting and like, you know, I'm not there. Why aren't I there? Is it, you know, is it my, and suddenly people going, is it my computer? Is it my system? Is it this? What is it? And it felt like I was like, I'm having a backstage experience at the same time as having a front stage, you know, a kind of a show experience.
I think that's right. And I mean, the practical reasons why we couldn't, there were so many practical reasons why we couldn't get the interactive more out there. The number of people it's technically possible to do that, what your browser was. So as much as we're talking about the technology in people's hands, there's also huge barriers still that we need to work through as practitioners around what browser you use, what spec your computer is. What we did learn is that what I would look at next time is smart televisions. Like, television is still the collective space where people watch in-home entertainment. The mobile is less interesting when you're, you know, the mobile is the gateway. That's where you do your booking. That's how you sort of organize your life. But when you want to experience something immersively, it's a larger screen experience. And yeah, we had many people with 2 to 3 households had like 2 to 3 people in their household watching it together, intergenerationally. There was no, from a younger audience, there was no question absolutely what they were experiencing, and they looked at a repeat performance. So they would go, they're really interested in persistent worlds. They really accept the idea of persistent world, and would come back again and again looking at that story world. And there was one bit which was really interesting where kids were watching the performance and then retelling it back to the grown-ups what was going on. So this Twitch culture that you talked about, which is the meta-narrative of talking about the piece, really interesting. We learned so much. There's so much to learn about all of that. But we do need to think about whose stories, what storytelling is happening, how we don't homogenize this work and go, that's how you do it. All of that is it's a really important time to not look at it as solution. And also, as we come back from the pandemic and we open buildings again, how do we take this community with us? How do we not go, thanks very much, digital, that was great while we couldn't get in. See you later. We're going back to our traditional comfort zones. We've really got to think about that, and that all of that is complicated, and all of that is people.
I very, very much so. I think Sam said it really well earlier when she also talked about the DIY culture. And the fact that actually, interestingly, you know, you've talked about that's Marshmallow Laser Fest, a slightly smaller, you know, company, kind of quite swift. They can kind of respond, react, create work quite quickly. And then you've got like 3 kind of large organizations. Actually, it feels like the approach to this was trying to make it almost DIY, almost, you know, that kind of try and move quite swiftly with it to try and create, you know, this experience while you were learning. And what we have learned, I suppose, over the last couple of decades is that's exactly what large tech companies do. When they put the software out, it's not actually, you know, all finished. A lot of the learning is done from feedback. And all the panelists today, everybody has kind of talked about kind of taking learning, taking feedback, taking, you know, even in a random email from someone saying, actually, that didn't work for me, but maybe it was because of this. Well, I'm finding that audiences aren't, there's a divide, isn't there? The audiences who go, you fix it, and those that go, I think this was this problem. What do you think?
We need to give space to audiences to have that conversation. And often in the art sector, the pressure is for us to put out fully polished production pieces. And research and development is such a crucial aspect of what how we're judged upon the work that we make too, and who our critics are in that space. I think coming through, having a dialogue with our audiences to ask them what they think isn't about them defining what a creative vision is. It's a dialogue, and it's about connection. And that piece of audience research really helped us make an inclusive piece, rather than a piece that might have been on a VR headset just for a small collective group of people that wouldn't reach that number. We know there's an appetite for this work. We know there's an appetite. You know, you can talk about taste, that's a different thing. But people showed up. People showed up, and they felt strong, and they felt welcomed. And what do you do with that 65,000 people that were curious is a really important question. But sometimes we feel it's vulnerable not to put something out, that is that's why there was a curtain drop moment in it where you saw behind the scenes. And that was probably the hardest piece for us to get right in rehearsal. But when it did, my word, it changed people's perception. And, you know, the interactivity had mixed responses. Again, that's okay, because we're crafting something with an audience. So,
I think
yeah,
you're absolutely right. That moment he came out of the world and he went backstage and you saw the live act, that's when the penny drops and you go, okay, I knew this was live, but my word, it is live. You also talked about, I'm going to open up to questions. There's a couple of questions in there and I'd like to open the discussion up a little bit as well. But you, and at this point, you mentioned homogeneity and the fact not to make this homogenous. When you have got 92 countries, all the cultures that exist within those countries, 65,000 people, the experiences they bring into it, there's a real opportunity to create worlds playing with, you know, the stories of Shakespeare, which are actually, they're all universal stories. You can take a story and you can put King Lear in South Asia really easily. You can do the same thing, you know, in Africa. That is fathers and daughters. Midsummer Night's Dream, it gives you the opportunity to go surreal, to create a character that's made of boulders. You know, you can, but you can do that with all stories within this space. So suddenly characters and can actually look and be whatever you want them to look and be like. I mean, your the aesthetic was very high polished, even within Gathertown, and the avatars that we've all created. You know, if I'm interested in kind of finding out, you know, if people went for the same gender that they are, or whether they went for the same hair, or whether, because you're choosing your identity. So when you're choosing your identity, what do you choose? Suddenly, there's things that are really, you can be quite playful. You can be really playful.
And you're quite right. You're giving yourself as a maker different choices. Also as an audience, you have different choices. And the toolkit that we were working with, the streaming technology that we were working with, gave us different choices on how to share a performance. And what's delightful when you're looking at different choices is the unexpected consequences of those choices. And that maybe by breaking out and exploding the concept of what liveness is and what performance is, and not looking at our cultural biases of what we bring into when we make work, that it's the unexpected consequences of those choices, which is the most interesting thing for us to take forward. And you're quite right, when I was joining today, I was clicking through the avatars and going, which ones am I, and all of that. And I'm going to my perceived visual identity of who I am. But that may not be how I identify. And that's really interesting. So
I've got a headscarf on. My avatar has a head. I haven't worn a headscarf since I was 25. I mean, my dad, I'm just sat here thinking my parents would be going, you're such a liar. I had to choose my identity, and I was like, okay, they haven't got this hair color, and if I'm going to go with this hair color, I'm going to be an old lady or an old man, which would have been interesting, you know, little old lady with a stick. I'm not ready for that yet, even as an avatar. However, what is the identity that I am comfortable in as an avatar? I was all right, I am a Muslim, therefore I'll wear the headscarf. And I thought I need to take a screenshot to show my parents, just to say to them, look, I'm choosing it. And they'd be like, well, consider that in real life, why don't you? You know, it's suddenly it becomes much more playful. It becomes much more, you know, you can have quite complex discussions in a way that I think kind of takes some of the sting, some of the weight out, and can actually be much more interesting. I'm going to go to questions because I'm aware of time, and I would love to keep you guys here and talk about this forever, I have to say. But Akila, there's a question for you where Jim's asking about, you know, how did you manage to pull together the funding for, you know, Return? Who else are you working with? I think there's two of you who are part of this project.
Sorry, it cut out when you said the last. Who is what?
There's about two. I think there's you and another artist who are working within that kind of a you know, a portal project.
Okay, so it's funded. Initially, it was funded by the Arts Council, so it's happened in a couple of phases. It's now in the second phase. So it was supported by a residency that I did with Invisible Flock in 2019, and funding that I got from Light Night Leeds and the Arts Council. In the second phase, it's supported by my fellowship at the University of Leeds, the Arts Council again, and the British Council. So it's a couple of different funders, and also some of my own self-funding in terms of the research and the trips and stuff that I do. I'm currently working with a technologist called Simon Fletcher, and also getting support in kind from Invisible Flock, East Street Arts, and I'm going to miss somebody now. But yes, a lot of people in a variety of different ways. And going forward in the next couple of months, I will be working with more artists, technologists, and creators who will feed into the work, some through conversation, some through physical collaboration and making and design. But it's going to evolve into quite a hybrid project with lots of different partners.
I think that also feeds into...
And York Media, sorry, are producing the project. York Media are producing the project.
Brilliant. I think you've touched massively upon the fact, and Sarah mentioned it earlier about partners, stakeholders, that actually this world and making work in this world and digitally actually does require sometimes many more people, many more minds, and many more kind of different ways of thinking. Really good question from Abby, actually, which I think touches upon what Matt was saying earlier about how Closed Forum create their games. Abby's asked a question. I'm going to read it out because I think the whole of it needs to be heard. So, big conferences and workshops can be really intimidating and full of social anxiety. It would be great to see how GatherTown can help overcome some of that stuff and create a platform that's not just about the extroverts, but about those people who tend to stand back and hold back a bit.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good point, but also I think that bringing events onto platforms like this just bring different barriers. So there's barriers in who has access to to technology, and who is it's still who's in the room and who's spotlighted and things like that in case of something like this. But I think as a platform, GatherTown can be used really well to create really inclusive spaces, because you can do loads of really interesting things. We're really just scraping the surface with this event, but you can host it in really open ways that people can move to and from conversations, can listen into conversations without being part of it, can drop in and out at their leisure. They're able to access it without leaving their house and things like that. So I think we're really keen to keep using this platform and see the different ways that it can be experimented with, and getting feedback from people on how they use it.
Well, that's actually picking up on a question that Alex has just put in. Are there plans to grow the platform further? Because he's really enjoyed exploring the digital world that you've created. It actually would be good. We've got a few 2-3 minutes left, but it'd be good to kind of hear some of your thinking in creating this world.
So we started off. We got a map of Leeds up, and we were thinking, well, what we can do is ask people to ask where did you make it, and we'll plonk it on the map, and then people can walk up to the physical locations and interact with
the artworks.
Yeah, the different artworks. But we wanted to be a little bit more playful than that, so we looked at splitting the map up, and then we saw this imaginary space that lived in between the different sections of the map. So we'd working with 2023, we had some artists put in contact with us that wanted things to be represented, and then we did an open call for anything that anyone wanted to represent that was made in Leeds, made by people in Leeds, or made for people in Leeds, and then we would put that into the world and ask them what kind of item they wanted to represent it. And we were hoping to get 10 items in before this, just over a few things dotted around, and I think we're at 60 so far.
Yeah, it's around there.
Yeah, and we've already got a bunch more submissions over the last few days, so we're going to continue to add them in. And we want this we're really interested in seeing this as a platform that grows. We want it to be not curated, so we don't want it to be selective about what art is put in here. We want it to be a real representation of the diversity of work that's being created in the region.
Brilliant. I think it's really I think one of the questions that Alex had was is the platform going to grow? It would be interesting to kind of know, can it live forever? Is there a deadline an end to it?
I think as long as people are interested and we can, there is an audience for it. We'd really like it to grow. We'd like to continue building on it. It's just again, it's about feedback and whether people find it an interesting way to explore, to sort of consume content, whether sort of it is from local artists or other areas, and then experimenting from there, really.
And it sort of needs managing a little bit. So you can just open it up and allow anyone to build on it and place their own artworks wherever they want, but then that also gives people agency to like delete people's artworks and move things around and rename things. So there is a little bit of management that needs to sort of be thought about as we start thinking about our long-term plans for it.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to close it at that. We had one more question. I'll give Swati this question, and then we're going to close the discussion because I'm aware of people's time and other commitments. Swati's question is, it's an amazing interactive creative space. When is it going to be open for public visiting?
So at the moment, it is open in 2-hour slots throughout Leeds Digital Festival. So all today and tomorrow, and I think you can still book tomorrow for a 2-hour slot to go and explore. But we're really keen to let people go after this panel discussion and go explore as well, and the other event that's happening later today as well. And then after that, we need to think about how we manage letting people in and out, and if it's just an open place for everyone to go explore whenever they want. The main issue with GatherTown is it's capped at 25 users unless you pay for it. So the more more people could come into it, more than 25, but it just starts running really poorly with loads of lag, and it's not really an ideal experience. So if we just opened it up, then I guess the more people that interact with it, the less efficient it is. So we need to think about how we manage audiences in over after this festival.
There is one more question from Liam, and then I am going to bring the session to a close, because I like this question because it talks about the aesthetics of this, but it also talks about the aesthetics of the anxiety page as well. It feels like very much of, like I said, I'm an 80s kid, so this resonates with me because it's the games of that time, the pixelated games of that time. And Liam's question is there any difference that you've seen in how different age groups react to the look of GatherTown?
I think. Sorry, you go back. I think one of the key reasons why we made it this aesthetic is to make it as accessible as possible, to allow people from a wide range of ages to see the world and not feel intimidated by it. And the same with Anxiety Arcade, because there is at the minute there is a sort of retro revival in video games, so you have sort of the younger audiences that are still able to engage and understand what it's about. But we really wanted to make sure that people that were sort of an older generation could still look at it and go, oh, I understand how to walk around, I understand what that actually is. And I think that was really, really important for us, because I know I've been in sort of different sort of technologies where I felt so different forums and platforms where I felt alienated because I don't understand fully grasp how it meant to work. So as easy as we can, if possible, we can have people just sort of engage straight away, and we think the retro revival does give that. The aesthetic does give people that accessibility. And that's kind of why we went from that point of view.
Thank you so much for that, Adam. I'm going to close the session. Tom's actually just put a comment and said Roblox and Minecraft would suggest retro aesthetics are pretty popular with young and broad audiences. I totally agree. Totally agree. Thank you so much to the wonderful panelists. Thank you so much to the audience that attended today. Please do, while this session's open, please do go have a look and explore the space. It is amazing. There's some fantastic spaces that Matt and Adam have created. If you'd like to book onto a session to look around more, there are more sessions throughout the day tomorrow. And if you go onto Eventbrite, I think Emma will post a link in the chat after this talk. You can go and book into some sessions to come back in tomorrow. If you want to use the world or speak about how it might grow, please get in touch with info@leeds2023.co.uk. And this booking, server booking, finishes at 12:30. So you've got about 10 minutes. I want you to give people time just to be able to go and have a look at the space. When you leave GatherTown, just close your browser at the top, and you'll not be in here anymore. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to the panelists as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.